May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always pleasing to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. 97 years ago, there was an Olympics competition, and there was a British runner, a pretty famous fellow, you've probably heard of him, named Eric Liddell, who ran in those Olympics, and he was a very fast sprinter. In fact, he was expected to win the 100-meter sprint, the 100-meter dash at that Olympics. He was widely expected to win. And then he didn't run. And he didn't run because the qualifying heats for the finals of the 100-meter sprint were held on a Sunday. And he said, I will not run on a Sunday. And this tells you something about Eric Liddell. Now, they made a wonderful movie of it called Chariots of Fire, and that was, it actually won the Best Picture in 1981, I think it was. And it's just a great story. And one day, one of Eric's colleagues asked him why he ran, and the reason he asked why he was running was because Eric Liddell was also a missionary, and he started schools and orphanages and medical centers, all of these in China. And so he's working hard at both things, and he continued, even after the Olympics, he continued to run and to compete, and he won a few medals on the world stage even after those Olympics. And so his friend asked him, why do you keep running? I mean, it's clear that God has called you to be a missionary. Look at all of these things that your organizations are doing. And Eric looked at his friend and he said, God made me fast. And when I run and am fast, it fills me with joy. I love that because it's such a beautiful illustration of that God gives us gifts and wants us to use those gifts. And in Eric's case, the gifts included his work as a missionary and his running. He was fast. He did win a gold in the 400-meter race at that Olympics and a bronze in the 200-meter. So he didn't completely miss out. So I've asked Terry Rogers to come and share part of his story and to tell us a little bit about using his gifts. And Terry's done a few things, just a few. Let's see, he is a retired pulmonologist, and I asked him about that this morning. That means that he studied the lungs, all right, and helped people with their lungs. And he also is retired from running one of the campuses of the Lakeside Milam Recovery Center rehab facility, and he was the president, CEO of an organization that worked for many years to improve healthcare outcomes in the state of Washington. Until very recently, he was an avid kiteboarder and windsurfer. What doesn't this guy do? He does a lot. But today, I've asked him to share his photography with us. Now, Terry takes a lot of pictures, but in particular, he takes portraits. And so I've asked him to tell us a little bit about that. Why don't you go ahead and get started, and Chris and I'll move the TV. Yes. Yeah, you're going to want to. Those of you back. This is really worth seeing. So.
Good morning. Good morning. So David has asked me to share a little bit about how I got into doing what I'm doing youngest of four.
I think you might need to move your microphone up.
Okay.
How's that? Is that better? Say
That's
something.
that.
It needs to be turned on.
How about that?
Hey.
Awesome.
So as I said, I'm the youngest of four. My dad was a multi-talented guy who was a photographer, amongst other things. He was a painter and an engineer and a printer and so forth. So the seed was planted early for me. I sort of slipped into photography when I was in medical school, actually, in New York City. I used to do street photography on the streets of New York. This was back in the film days in the last century. And I would have contact sheets printed, and then I would co-opt the darkroom at the pathology laboratory, where I was actually not supposed to be, but used it anyway. And someone said to me one morning, you know, someone's come into the pathology lab over the weekend. Do you have any idea who it is? I said, no, I have no idea who it is. So that sort of got me started. After that, I sort of dropped off doing photography, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And started again a number of years ago. Our son Luke was a very gifted visual and performing artist, and I bought him a really nice camera when he was a senior in high school. And when Luke died, I inherited his camera, and I started shooting again. And I remember the time it was like, look, everything is game for my camera at this point, you know. Nature photography, sunsets. We lived near Carkeek Park, and Karen would look out the window and say, oh, it looks like it's going to be a good sunset, so I'd get in the car and drive down. And I then had the opportunity to take a couple of photography trips, and it was on the second of those trips. It was a wonderful trip through the Southwest. We saw all the parks. And the leader of that trip was an Englishman who brought with him a couple of models. And it occurred to me during that trip that I was more given to taking pictures of the people who were on the trip than the scenery that we were actually seeing. And I didn't really know what to do about that because I was a little afraid of what that meant for me. You can do a snapshot. We've all been the subject of snapshots in our lives. Oh, smile and do this. But there was something more to engaging with another person in this context that drew me in and also scared me just a little. I had no idea how to do this. Lighting is important. I knew nothing about lighting. Where do you put a light? How do you set it up? How much light do you use? Where do you put the subject? Where do you put the subject? How do you pose them? How do you ask them to connect? And in that sort of process, I was more and more drawn to doing what I was doing, even if I didn't know what I was doing. So I'll tell the nub of the story. The nub of the story is this: when I engage another person for their portrait, it is a holy moment. It is a moment of sanctity. It's a moment that we both enter into in a very significant way. You can say, oh gosh, it's not all that. Well, it is actually. And there's another part of that I had to address for myself, which is, am I really good enough to do this? Am I a phony? Am I putting myself in a place where I really don't belong? Or can I actually carry this off? And in that setting, in that uncertainty, the gift that I received was by virtue of people showing up and giving me the message is absolutely you belong here. This is what we want to do. There's an agreement that's not set out on paper. You don't sign anything, but there's an agreement between you as the artist and that person. That agreement is in the form of a covenant, and I love that word covenant because it really is an agreement. The Latin base for that word is convenire, which means agreement or come together. And it really is an agreement in that moment. I am willing to display who I am for your camera. And in that message is like, and I know that you will take care of me. You will keep me safe. You will accept what I am giving you in a way that honors who I am and honors who you are. So how did I get into it, this portrait stuff? Well, you might recall that we've hosted a number of times United We Stand. And in December of 2016, without really knowing what I was doing, I walked into the tent down there and said, I would like to offer to do portraits of your participants. And they looked at me like, who are you? They said, well, take it back to our leadership and we'll let you know. So they did, and they said, yes, you can come down. And so I came down, honestly not knowing quite what I was doing. I had one light, I had a background, and so forth. But in that opportunities, the seed that was planted started to grow for me. You might recall that I had actually displayed some of these images on the wall in the narthex earlier, but this is the one image that said to me, yes, I can actually do this. This person was willing to say to me, you may capture me. And I must tell you that happened is the first time I went down, there were only 4 people who showed up. I printed up copies of their image and I brought them back to them as a gift. That with every picture that I do, I give the picture, give the subject a picture. And a week later, they called and said, could you come back? There are other people who want to have the picture taken. And this was one of the gentlemen who was very hesitant and resistant to begin with. And you can see there's still a little resistance in his eyes, yes? Not surprisingly, some of these people have not been treated with the kind of respect and fairness that one hopes for in other human beings in encounters. And in fact, one of the guys said, you know, I let him take my picture once, ended up on the post office wall or something like that. I said, well, no, it was given or sold to the FBI. That was in December of 2016. In February of 2017, I elected to participate in a program led by a dear friend, colleague, and mentor of mine, Dr. John, in Krakow, Poland, where he lived at the time. And there were about 25 of us there at this week-long conference. And I brought my camera and a couple of other things. Again, didn't quite know what I was doing, but there comes a moment when it clicks. Better? Better. All right. That's okay. So I offered to do portraits of the people there. I had minimal equipment. But the moment that came to me was when I had this young woman stand actually under the overhang of a garage, and it was a cloudy day. I had no other lighting with me, whatever. And when I saw this, and when she saw that, and when I saw her reaction to it, it was like, oh yeah, there's no turning back at this point. This is where I want to head. Again, my friend John Scherer, who led this conference, tells a great story about when you're doing an activity like Liddell. I didn't have the speed of Liddell. In fact, my lacrosse coach used to call me Swifty, not because I was swift. When the moment comes that nothing else in the world matters about other than what you're doing and how important and rewarding that is for you, it tells the story of when God made the heaven and the earth and the animals and the grass and green, and the seventh day he looked at what was out there, which he had created, and he said that it was, yeah. You know, the base word for that is interpreted to be good. The base word is tov, T-O-V, from which comes its many other iterations. But when you think about it, if you were just to complete what he had just done, would you sit back and say, oh yeah, it's okay. It's not bad. Maybe I could do better. No, what he did was he said, I looked at that and it was Tov. If you want to know anything about me in this world, look at what I just did. It's like, yes, this is Tov. So what's Tov? in your life, and this is what's Tov in mine. I have one other image to show you. That was in February of 2016. In May of that year, I asked David if I could set up a little studio outside and shoot any of the elder people in church who might want to have their images done. And you might recall this woman here. So any portrait basically is an amalgamation. It's an amalgamation of what the person wishes to give and what you were able to capture. I could give each of you a camera and have you take a picture of Lou or anyone else, and would come up with 35 or 40 individual versions of who that person is. And that's a reflection of the interaction. That's a reflection of who you are and who that person is and how they feel comfortable with you. Later that year, in 2017, I took advantage of a relationship that I had had over the years. I was medical director for an outfit called Providence Elder Place. It's a wonderful program that takes care of very frail elderly. In fact, it's designed to keep nursing home eligible people out of nursing homes. And it's a comprehensive program of medicine and transportation and housing and occupational therapy and medication and so forth. And I just sort of out of the blue called someone I knew down there and said, I'd like to come down and do portraits of some of your employees. And they said, fine, we'll call you back. One thing led to another, and I went down and I started, and then it was like, oh, well, those aren't so bad. How about if we do a few more and get patients involved? So I sit on one of the peripheral boards of the Providence Healthcare System, and I took advantage of that to get an entree into 3 or 4 other of their facilities, and over the past few years have done probably 600 or 700 portraits within the Providence system. What I'd like to show now on the video, David, is a video slideshow of some of these portraits put to music. And it was put to music and put together by a college classmate of mine who is also, who is not also, but is a very, very skilled photographer. And this was done to enter into the art show program of our 60th college reunion. My college class is filled with people who are really talented, and this was part of it. So let's go ahead and show that.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace
Thank you. I think you can see how powerful this can be, how rewarding it can be. I have just a couple more to show you, then I'll sit down. For the past 20 years, I have been medical director of Lakeside Milam Recovery Centers. It's an inpatient and outpatient program for those afflicted with drug and alcohol abuse. There isn't anybody in this room whose life has not been affected by drug or alcohol use. It is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's an equal opportunity illness. It doesn't care who you are, what your education is, what your family background is. It just affects people. About 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, I started doing portraits of patients when they come into our program for basically a 4-week program, during which there's education, there's counseling, there's group stuff, there's lectures and so forth. When they first arrive at Lakeside Milam, we do what's called a mug shot, just an identifying picture so that we know who is who. Technically, it's far from acceptable, but it is what it is. And then they offer to do a portrait on their last week of treatment before they go home. It was put on hold for a number of reasons. It's hard to do portraits with people who are wearing a mask. You don't get the whole deal, right? But I just wanted to show you a couple recently that give you some idea. And generally what happens is either the patient or the photographer ends up in tears when we show what's going on. So this is a mugshot of a young man who was in our facility not too long ago. His name is not important. I will tell you that these people have all signed releases so I can share this information with you. And you can tell that this is a person who's probably not so settled. I use the word disheveled. Their life is disheveled in so many ways. And this is his picture when he was finished with 4 weeks of treatment. I think it speaks for itself. It's pretty powerful. Last one, promise. This is a woman who was with us not too long ago also. I don't recall what her drug of choice, doesn't matter. But you can tell that this is someone who's not particularly settled in her existence. And this is her graduation sort of picture. We offer to do this. It's their choice. We don't force them into it, but many people enjoy having that. So I think you got a little sense of what this work means to me. Each of us in this room has some work that is meaningful and important for them. What is it that gives you tov? What is it that you could just, if someone said to me, Terry, here's your camera, you can do nothing for the rest of your life except take pictures of people, I'd say, oh darn. What is your oh darn stuff? What is it that feeds your soul? Thanks for listening. I appreciate the opportunity.
I would like to take a couple of minutes now and pick someone that you can speak, that you can share a little story with, someone near you, and let's take 2 minutes each and share what is a gift that God has given you and how have you used it. So go ahead and pair up and let's do that right now. Go ahead. While we're moving the furniture around, you can do that. I need a 2-minute timer. up and let's switch the person that's sharing. Let's let the other person share. Okay. "30 seconds. Finish your stories." No, I don't. All right, thank you. Let's wrap it up. Here, Susanna. Thank you very much for the clock. I think I have probably preached about seeing Christ in others 100 times, and I've never expressed it as eloquently as those photographs. I mean, that was remarkable. And I had an involuntary gasp when Terry switched from the intake picture to the portrait of that first young man and the woman as well. I mean, that's just, my heart leapt from my chest when I saw that, because that so beautifully captures what we're talking about, why we seek what is sacred in others. And now, my friends, we're going to jump right past the Nicene Creed. Sorry, God, we'll do it next week, because we've used a whole bunch of time. We're going to go straight to the prayers of the people. Please stand.